On this episode, we talked about existentialism and Irvin Yalom's four givens, namely meaninglessness, isolation, freedom, and death. We also went over some Q&As and talked about death.
Let's talk about death, baby. Let's talk about grief and mourning. Is it argumental or existential? What's it mean to me? Let's talk about death.
Hi, I'm Benny Capal, and I'm a funeral professional.
And I'm Nicholas Capal, a psychotherapist.
Hey, Nick, let's talk about death.
Let's do it.
Hey, and welcome to another exciting podcast episode of Nick. Let's talk about death. Today we're going to talk about existentialism.
No, existentialism.
Existentialism when it comes towards death and when it comes towards psychology. How does that sound?
I think the focus when I was challenged with the idea of existentialism in this conversation, I think the important one I wanted to focus in is how existentialism applies to bereavement, how people acknowledge and go through the stages of existentialism according to Irvin Yalom. And his four were isolation, meaninglessness, freedom, and death. When he talked about existentialism, he believed that those four kind of ran the show. Now, little tidbit here, he did not write this towards bereavement. I'm taking his idea and moving it towards how to talk about it when it comes to bereavement. Just to be clear, if someone looks him up and is like, wait a minute, he's not really talking about bereavement here. No, he's not, but he is talking about existentialism, which completely applies to bereavement.
For the viewers out there who may not be learned in the subject, what is existentialism?
In all honesty, I don't know if there's a right answer to that question. Existentialism is a very in-depth conversation. One way I like to look at existentialism especially is the idea of death. So when you talk about death, the idea of death anxiety and terror management theory, you talk about this idea that we are born to die. So living with that anxiety, living with that fear, living with the idea that we are not going to live for forever brings about a lot of negative emotions, not to mention a lot of fear, like anxiety.
Nick, and I'm going to stop you there. We had a teacher, if you remember in high school, that said there was two guarantees in life. You're going to pay taxes and you're going to die.
That's an inaccurate statement. Some people don't pay taxes, but you will die. So.
Yes, you are born to die. And that's actually what we're going to talk about today.
So yeah, let me go into this. I'm going to save death for the last one because
can I stop you here and just don't make it boring?
I won't. I'll try not to.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
So let's save death for the apparent one. That's the end one. So the first one we're going to talk about is meaninglessness. So meaninglessness means that we didn't choose to be born, right? We were thrown into this existence, and we have to somehow make it through it, right? None of us said, "Hey, I want to be born." You're just born. So one of the big things in psychology that they talk about is the idea of making meaning through life. Viktor Frankl was a really big promoter of this idea. He wrote a book called Man's Search for Meaning, and he was a Holocaust survivor. And he was one of the things he talks about is how a lot of them made it out of the Holocaust camps was finding some sort of meaning, something that they put their whole strength into, their whole mind into, to basically shut out everything else that was terrifying around them. I highly advise anybody who is having a existential dilemma of trying to find meaning in their life to read that book. It's a fabulous book, easy to read. You'll love it. And I don't like reading, so I could tell you that Viktor Frankl's book is spot on.
But I can tell you that doesn't sound easy to read mentally.
Well, no. It's going to probably bring some triggers in. One of the things that I want to say when we're talking to grief and loss, bereavement, I want to focus on that, right? So meaninglessness is, I think, when people lose the love of their life or a loved one in their life, it changes the meaning of their life. So, for example, if a husband has been married to his wife for 30 plus years or more than that, some people God bless them, are 50 years married, when they lose their loved one, now they have to search for another meaning, because one of their meanings was being a husband, being a spouse, being a good husband. Now they don't have that. They don't have that person that has always been there at the end of the day, that person that supported them financially, physically, any way support, that person isn't there anymore. So then they're stuck with this idea, so what now?
And that makes sense because, when it comes to like people that are married for, 50 years, I've had the honor of taking care of families that have been married for 50 years. And you see the husband or the wife, the spouse, just completely lost because for, the last 40 years of their life, 50 years of their life, they have been tethered and they work together, and life is that's what it was. Life is me and you together. We're going to get up in the morning. We're going to drink our coffee, read our papers. We're going to play bingo, do whatever we do, make dinner, lunch, et cetera, et cetera. You're going to do your job. I'm going to do my job. But at the same time, it's a unity thing that at the end of the day, we're together. So when you lose that, it's almost like losing an arm or losing a leg. And I can understand the meaningless of that because, wait, I thought I was living because I wanted to be a good dad or spouse, or, you get into this frame of this is what I need to do. So if you lose that, now what?
Well, not to mention, if you look at, there's a lot of older people that once they lose their spouse, within 6 to 8 months, they themselves die because there's no point. They lost meaning.
Nick, I'm going to touch on what you just said about the six to 8 months. There is a correlation for sure, and I think that's the heartbreak to begin with. We've all read Where the Red Fern Grows, where the dog passes away and then the other dog passes away because he lost his partner, or she lost her partner. No, I'm sorry.
Sure.
Someone's going to yell at.
Yeah.
Feel free to leave it in the comments down below who lost who. But you are absolutely right. I do find a difference when it's a young death because there's other things to take in consideration. They're still raising their children, or they just got their first grandchild, or they have something that they're holding on to that has something to do with something else that keeps meaning, right? It comes down to meaning.
That's what we're talking
So
about.
what you were bringing up is a perfect example. What I would say, we're correlating to is you're talking about two 80-year-olds and 90-year-olds that have lived their whole lives together. One passes away, and then the other was like, okay, well, the kids have all flew the coop.
They're doing
Grandkids have already had their kids. At this point, I'm content. It's not that I don't think they want death to show up at the door. I think I'm ready. I'm okay with it. I've ran the long run. My journey's over. I will say there is a difference when there's faith related compared to non-faith related. I think, and yet again, this is just my personal experience. It's not everybody. I'm not saying. I find that people with faith, they'll say all the time, I'm okay to go because I know where I'm going, and I know I'm going to see my spouse or my kid that I lost or blah, blah, blah in the afterlife. And that comes with, going back to you, they have meaning in dying, which is
and they also
interesting.
They also have meaning that they're going to, God, whoever's in
Overpower,
charge
yeah,
here,
the higher power.
the higher power is going to protect me, is going to basically guide me whether I'm going to die or live. That's a meaning. Faith is a meaning. I think a lot of people struggle with that meaning, with faith,
absolutely.
but I'm saying, if we're going to talk about faith, I think faith in itself is a meaning, right?
Yeah.
If you believe in faith, you believe that there's a meaning. I'm going to live my life to the fullest to make it to heaven or whatever their afterlife is, right?
Well, I'm sure though we're all human, so I'm sure that even people that are the most faithful probably still consider the opposite side. What if there isn't? That's just a human nature to want to guess. And I think that's where it comes down to the anxiety of it.
I think that's a beautiful thing. I think to question makes it a deeper meaning and love to whatever your will is, your power is. That's the first one, that we are all born in a meaninglessness existence, and that to make it through this life, we have to find meaning, value in our lives, right? That's track one. Track two is freedom, choice. With every choice you make, you are grieving the choice you didn't make. This idea that, let's say you choose to be a chiropractor. Well, with that choice, you're also choosing not to be A, B, and C. So you're grieving the choices that you didn't have.
Absolutely. And the easiest way to kind of give this out to the listeners would be the what if scenario. What if I would have tried out for that team? Or what if I would have put my application into that place that I really wanted to? Or what if I didn't listen to mom and dad and I did my own path? That's a vague version, but does that make sense?
I think a quick, easy way to say this is the one that got away. You hear that a lot.
Oh, yeah.
That one that got away.
Nick, you're the one that got away.
But maybe because the one that got away, you actually made a better choice. But I digress.
Can you correlate that to the normality we hear all the time of terminal patients where what if I would have had treatment? Or what if I would have went into that doctor's appointment 6 months ago when I didn't want to go because, life, all this jazz, or, I had that pain one time in my leg. Should I have noticed that? Or a friend, even worse, or a spouse, he was limping on that leg years ago and I never said anything. Would that correlate to that same scenario?
What I was correlating to let's go even deeper than that. Let's talk about the person that does have terminal cancer and decides not to get chemo, right? They're deciding at that point that I'd much rather live not sick, throwing up all the time, and enjoy life, being present, be in the moment. But by choosing that choice, they're literally not prolonging their life with the idea of having chemo, right?
Possibly, yeah.
But think about that choice, though, right? They're grieving either way they make that choice. Because let's say they do chemo and then they're sick and miserable and they live 6 months later than they would have without chemo. But you're always, no matter what choice, it doesn't have to be a hard choice. It could be something silly. Like I decided to take this route versus this route. Driving the second route, they almost hit a deer or something. Then you have this choice of like, oh, well, why did I take that? Why did I take the road less traveled? Right?
Robert Frost.
Yeah.
Bobby Frost.
But this is the idea, is that the freedom. How I wanted to correlate it.
Sorry, I went a little way.
No, it's fine. How I wanted to correlate is that we have the freedom to choose to love someone. And when we choose to love someone, we choose automatically that we're going to be hurt when they're gone.
And the more we love them, the harder it's going to hurt. Obviously,
Correct.
the bigger the fall is going to be. And that is an interesting, because we accept that. We are accepting love. So we take on the burden of when we lose that love.
So freedom to choose, meaning that whatever choices we make, we're automatically grieving the choices we didn't make. And I'm comparing this to the idea that when we choose to love someone, we're choosing to be hurt when they pass on.
Right. And I'm grieving the choice of doing this podcast with you.
Thank you.
Okay. Moving on.
Or not doing this podcast.
Or not.
Because you chose to do this podcast. What about the grief of not doing it? Anyways, Moving on. The third one. So we have meaninglessness, we have freedom, and the third one is isolation. This one's a really deep one.
Sounds chilly.
This one's it's very dark. This idea is that we are born alone and we will die alone.
I nailed that on the hammer on the first one, so do I get extra credit points?
No extra credit points on this one.
Whatever.
But I think with this isolation, when you lose someone you truly love, I think it's a deep reminder of what it feels like to be alone, especially when that person is your confidant or the person you always relied on, the person that was always there when you needed them, and now they're not there anymore, which brings about this deep feeling of isolation. Now I'm alone again, right? And I think even deeper, you think about these people that have been married for 50 plus years, that person, their person in their life is now gone. They are completely, utterly alone. And even if they have family, even if they have kids, the relationship that a parent has with their kid, and I can say this because I'm now a parent, the relationship that you have with your kid is different than the relationship you have with your spouse.
Well, I mean, absolutely. And you take away the lover situation, you have a companion. You have somebody that is basically has been your best friend, your confidant, the person that you trust the most, the person that you are willing to share a bed with for 50 years, whether you like it or not. I'm not saying all married people share the same bed. I'm just saying this ultimate theory. And that is interesting. And I actually want to put a point on you and I, because I want to bring in isolation to the identical twin or twin world, because I've had the honor of taking care of twins that have passed on. And I've had conversations, I personally, because I have obviously a personal feeling in this.
You have personal
realm,
experience in
personal
this realm.
experience in the personalness of being a twin.
Sure.
I've talked to them, and the first thing I say is, I want you to know that I see you, because no one else sees you right now, because everybody else is thinking about the family, which, no offense, they deserve all the wife, the husband, all that, the kids, the grandkids. But you lost half of yourself today. You lost your true identity, because I think twins share identity from the beginning, whether they like it or not. And we've had the honor of being twins, so I've never felt isolated, because I know that out in the world there is literally a carbon copy of me doing his own thing, and that's kind of that is actually a very, very good comfort to be a twin, because we already have that opportunity to have somebody else that has been sharing this life with us. And I'm not trying to be campy or weird, because I know everybody out there who isn't a twin is probably thinking this is a weird concept. But if you're a twin out there, please comment down below and tell us how you feel about this, because there is something special about being, because you said being born alone. We weren't born alone. We were born together.
Unless you came out together.
We were holding hands, Nick.
No, we were 4 minutes apart. Most twins are. Unless it's a
But I mean,
C-section,
that's
which they pull
an
multiple
idea,
out at
Nick.
the same time.
We were literally.
Yes, you could challenge the literacy. Literacy? I don't even know if that's a word, but let's go with it. You can challenge the literacy of what I'm talking about, but what I'm really saying
You're
is
saying
that
physically you were born alone. I get that, but you're taking into consideration ESP. You're taking into consideration things that they can't explain about twins.
Sure.
So we possibly could be the only thing that wasn't born alone.
Sure.
And what's strange about that, and what I find is because it goes back to every scientifical.
Well, I mean, if we're getting literal here, there was multiple people born at the same time.
I get that. So you're saying, like, if you were born at 1237 in China and 1237 in
America,
Europe,
technically you're
born the same. Maybe
well,
they're twins. Maybe they're twins.
So
maybe there's
1237.
But what I want to say to you is, because I think this is important, is there is an identity crisis when you lose an identical twin or even a twin.
Well, I mean, you hear about that with isolation, even with twins when they go to different colleges, especially if they were super close growing up. There is an isolation with twins, I think, deeper than most people would imagine.
Well, it's really tough when you have a really smart twin like Ben, and then you got, a little bit less, he needs a little more help.
You're right.
There's a little more help out there.
We got
Nick,
one that has
the
a bachelor's degree, one that has a master's, almost
the
has a
stud
doctorate.
muffin,
I get what you're saying.
The good-looking quaff, all
quaff.
this stuff
That's
going
it. That's it.
Anyways, I'm sorry, isolation. But
So-
I just wanted to touch on identical twins, because I think that's something
I
you
think
can touch on that nobody else
That might be.
unless they're
Let's
identical
save
twins.
that. Let's save that for a further
Can
episode.
you get back on your mic, please?
I am on my mic, and I'm going to say let's save that for a further episode.
Sorry.
Okay, that was track 3. The last one is death, and that's what we all know about this idea that we are all going to die. I think when bereaved people lose a loved one, they're also confronted with their own mortality. One day this is going to be me. It's deep. I think most of the time it's unconscious, but I think this brings up a lot of existential stuff, especially because a lot of people unlike me and you, Ben, we live around a funeral home. Coming to a funeral home is not a weird experience. It's not an abnormal experience for us. For most people, coming to a funeral home means death. I only come to this place when someone has died, or I'm talking about death. Pre-need is the idea, I'm going to die, so here's what we're going to talk about. Most people don't have the experiences we do at this juncture with a funeral home. So death, for me, what I'd like to say for a lot of people is that it brings out a lot of emotions that we are trained, even as young kids, children, not to talk about death. It's dirty, it's polluting, it's scary, and I think for some people it's just sick. Like, it's garbage. I mean, if you go to a physical sense of it, we are literally getting rid of a body. I know from my experience dealing with psychotherapy, and Ben, you could probably speak to your experience as a funeral director. There's a lot of misconceptions out there by adults feeling that their kids can't acknowledge or accept the idea of death, so therefore we tell them half-truths. For example, telling them grandma is sleeping.
And listeners, we are going to do a podcast on children in the funeral, so we'll get more into that. But I think I want to go back to that, but switch it on you. Do you think part of that is because the adult is uncomfortable with death, so they're actually trying to protect themselves over their children?
Absolutely. I think it's a both. It's a both situation.
So it's interesting.
If I'm uncomfortable, why would I put my kids through that?
Right.
Right. So, and in defense to parents, and I'm not trying to badmouth parents right now at all. I'm just saying that I think a lot of parents are not trained or not advised properly in how to properly talk to their children. But I 100% agree with you, Ben. I don't think a lot of people I know there's adults that don't come to a funeral because they're uncomfortable with
Correct.
it.
I've dealt with that. I've dealt with plenty.
And again, that's them not confronting the idea that they themselves will die.
I don't want to toot our own horn because that's not what we're here to do. We're here to talk about it and discuss it. We've had the opportunity and the privilege to be raised in a family where death was part of life. And I think that's the biggest problem that society today has with death is it's not a part of life. And I think this goes back into the reason why we're doing this podcast is because we want to talk and openly discuss that it's okay to talk about this. And if we can get you yet again, we talked about this in I think the first episode, the second episode, probably the third, fourth, fifth, eighth. If we can just start opening that discussion, I think death does lose a little bit of its scariness because there's some good in death. There's some absolute good in death. And you can take that back to nature. You burn down a forest, it's going to grow 2 times faster and 2 times more flourished because it comes from the ashes and from that we move.
Wow.
I'm not a botanist.
You know what? I was thinking about this the other day. I think the reason why me and you have a different experience is because I feel like we have a callus for death, right?
Ooh, that's good.
That doesn't necessarily mean that we can't reopen that callus. So, for example, if you're a guitar player and you learn how to play guitar and you play for a while, you begin to build calluses on your fingers. It doesn't hurt to play anymore.
Right.
Now, if you stop playing for 10, 15 years and you start it up again, you're still going to, even though you've built up those calluses, they're not going to be there anymore.
Or you play that one day.
So what I'm saying to you, I think the important thing is to keep talking, to keep learning, to keep asking questions, to keep listening to this podcast. This is a great way to listen and hear what I think people need to be at least exposed to. Whether you're not ready to talk about it yet, that's okay. As long as you're sitting with this and uncomfortability listening to this podcast, it's a great start. It's learning how to play guitar when we're talking about death. Okay, moving on. So those are the 4 Irvin Yalom of existentialism that the Givens he was talking about, and I just related them back to bereavement.
But what's interesting about all 4 is you can relate them completely to death. All 4 can be brought back to death.
Well, that's kind of the big thing about existentialism. Ultimately, at the end of the day, we're all going to die. Yeah. That's what we struggle with. That's existentialism wrapped up in a ball. But to say that's what existentialism is I want to be very careful because that theory is so broad and so spacious, if you get my drift, that you got to almost research it for 15 years before you really get a handle on it. And I think even when you get a handle on it, there's always these other questions that come up for you.
No, and I think you're absolutely right. And I think even when you think you've learned it all, or you could be like a professor on it, you're still learning because everything, in one of those topics, something new may address your life, or you might be thrown into something where like, oh my gosh.
Well, and I think that's the important part about
I feel
you guys,
that cold sting.
You listeners sending in questions. There's going to be some questions that come up that Ben and I have probably never thought about or never, you're probably going to shock us in some ways if you ask the right questions, because Ben and I don't know everything. We're human.
So if you have any thoughts on the 4 they're not called stages, are they, Nick? They're for
It's
topics.
It's Irvin Yalom's 4 existential givens. That's what he said.
If you have any questions about any of the givens, feel free to leave us a comment or email us, and we'll leave the email. It is let's talk about death pod@gmail.com. All right, Nick, we got some Q&As here.
Q&A, everyone loves that Q&A.
When did you accept that everyone dies? She writes, it occurred to me that I always had a defense mechanism growing up that only old people or people I didn't know are the ones that might die, and that people in my life probably wouldn't anytime soon. But as I got older, I realized that everyone dies, and everyone I know is guaranteed to die. I still haven't accepted this fact yet, despite being 27 years old. She's had a lot of life experience. My question to you is, do you remember what age you were when you accepted, not just realized, but fully accepted that everyone will die?
I think I was 14. For some reason, I remember very vividly being in the morgue and talking to Dad. Like, hey, Dad, you need to come over. We're making dinner or something. And it was like that brick in the face. You know, he's in the morgue working on, you know, a deceased person. And I just remember thinking to myself, like, this is going to happen. Whether we like it or not, this is going to happen. Probably prior to that, when I was 11, I lost my great-grandma, Grandma Mildred. And that was a tough funeral for me. Still is. Still to this day, I think back to that funeral. One of the things I always ask myself was, I was one of the, I think maybe the only one. Again, I was very young, and now I'm, what are we now? I'm 32?
32.
Yeah. I still remember I was one of the very few people that didn't cry. And there was a question to that of why didn't I cry? And still to this day, I'm very angry. I miss her. Not angry at anybody, but death itself. Like, why did you take her? I loved her. She meant a lot to me growing up. So maybe that was the first time. I mean, if you're asking when's the first time, maybe that was the first time. But I think in an adult brain, I'm going to go with my first answer. That was the first time, like, I literally was, like, comprehending the idea that one day I'm going to be on that table.
And I want to talk about Mildred's funeral because it's interesting that you bring her up. And you bring her up a ton, Nick, and I, you know, everybody out there. Mildred was a very special person to Nick and I growing up. But I actually don't remember anything about her funeral, which is a different problem, because I feel like I've repressed that whole day. I don't even remember the funeral, and that's so weird. Being a funeral director's son who eventually became a funeral director, I don't remember that, and that's something in itself. Is that something? Is that the reason why, you know, sometimes I can just compartmentalize and repress certain things? Obviously, I was there. You know, I was there with you. Obviously, I was crying because you remember everybody crying except you. But I don't remember what she looked like. I don't remember what the casket looked like, and that's really interesting. So I will say I was about the same age when I realized that everybody will die someday. But when it comes to Grandma's funeral, I don't remember it at all. So that was the first question, Nick. I got another Q&A.
Let's
everybody's
Q&A.
Q&A. All right,
Question,
Nick, this
answer,
one,
let's do it.
the title here is Severe Death Anxiety.
Ooh.
Yet not existing is the last of my worries. I have severe death anxiety, and the thought of not existing makes me scared of death. But what's worse is I can't stop imagining worse scenarios. Sorry, I gotta say it the right way. Scenarios where after death, I'm just a mind in darkness with no one cursed to just think. Or maybe this is a simulation making none of my loved ones real. What if I'm the only real person? I don't want my mom to be not real. She's the most important person in my life. What if after this I'm resurrected, forced to live in agony? help, but there's no period or exclamation mark, so I don't know how to say that last help.
So so let me clarify here. What you get out of that, what I got out of that, is she's more worried about the afterlife.
How do you know it's a girl?
Just a feeling.
It seems kind of sexist.
It might be sexist. I don't mean to be sexist. It just it seems like a feeling.
It seems like a
yeah.
More than a feeling, more than a feeling. No, I wouldn't say I wouldn't gender base this by any means, form, or shape. I'm sorry, I'm psychologizing. This has been psychology.
I just read into how it was.
But this is an interesting statement, and when it comes down to it, because I've had this thought. If you don't mind me interrupting you, Nick, I've had this thought too, where if you thought about death, there is that, and I think we talked about in this episode, that concern of what if there is no afterlife? What if it is just complete darkness? And that's a scary thought, because if there's nothing, this is why a lot of people have that, like, well, what's the point if there's nothing, What's the point? I'm not going to know anything. Nobody's going to know anything.
So I'm going to flip that, though. Flip the lens on that. If there isn't anything after, then why not live life to the fullest?
All right. And with that, Nick, I think we're running out of time here on this podcast.
The imaginary time we had put out.
So, with that,
thank you for listening.
And please check in. We'll have a lot of those topics we talked about earlier later on.
And if you especially wanted one that we talked about, we're going to talk about, make sure you send us a message, post a comment, do whatever to make sure that we get that point across.
Bring us some Q&As. We like them. Those Q&As are fun.
Q&A.
And then make sure if you have any questions or thoughts, you can contact us on our email at letstalkaboutdeathpod@gmail.com. You can also check us out on Facebook. You can also check us out on our Instagram. And whatever platform you're using, make sure you subscribe, you like, follow, all those. We need those. The more that you do, the more that we can do.
Well, not just that.
The more talking.
It's not just about us. It also lets you know when we're doing something that maybe you're really interested in, because we're going to continue talking about it, and hopefully you're going to continue listening to it.
Hopefully. All right. With that, I'm Benny.
And I'm Nicholas.
Hey, Nick. Let's talk about death.
I think we did, because if you're not talking about death, you're not living.
You're not living.